Not everyone feels the same way when it comes to LGBTQ plus representation in the media. For some, they have always seen themselves represented on the big screen, but for others, they may not have felt represented until later in their life. The topic of queer representation in the media should be a conversation, particularly with those within the community, to see all perspectives and sides and to ultimately better understand not only each other, but ourselves as well. To foster conversation, I invited two individuals, Kelsey Jones and Ziare Rene, and asked them about their thoughts, feelings, and stories regarding LGBTQ plus representation in the media. How do they feel about queer characters and stories being told on their screens? What content are they enjoying now? And what do they hope to see in the future in terms of queer representation? Let's see what LGBTQ plus representation in the media means for them as we look at Pride on Screen.
Representation in media only goes so far and can be a double-edged sword. Visibility always help material conditions, but that doesn't mean that media representation doesn't matter deeply to a lot of people.
For Jones, she said she feels that lesbian and sapphic representation in the media has increased. She mentions The L Word, a 2004 Showtime TV series about lesbian and bisexual women in Los Angeles, being an early example of queer representation she had seen.
Because of where I grew up in a very rural, very conservative religious environment, I didn't know that the L Word existed even when it did come out. And obviously, as has been talked about a lot since the original L Word came out, there were still issues with that representation. It was still, an almost exclusively white cast. There was a lot of issues with the trans representation in that series. And it was pretty much the only thing in terms of sapphic representation in media.
Jones asked what it would have been like if shows like A League of Their Own or The L Word Generation Q had been more common and watched them when she was younger.
I do think that it would have been really impactful and powerful to see that, and especially to see a broad range of representation, like not to just show gay characters, queer characters, trans characters as kind of a flat stereotypical character, but to show them as full human beings with, their own struggles and other pieces of their identity that impact their lives that aren't just focused on their sexuality or gender.
As for her thoughts on the current state of queer representation in the media, Jones said that as an adult, she appreciates the increase of representation she has seen and brings up the valid point on how much social media plays a part in representation as well.
Definitely hear a lot of young queer folks talk about the impact of having access to this type of media and access to social media too, which obviously broadens representation a lot because essentially anyone can become a piece of media representation, whether they intend to or not. So overall, I think it can definitely be a positive thing. And it is nice to see. I do appreciate having multiple pieces of media to go to that reflect a version of my experience, even though not all of those pieces of media are, super high quality. A lot of them still have their own issues in the portrayals, but it's still overall a positive in a lot of ways, I think.
Rene also shared the same sentiments when it came to his thoughts about the current state of queer representation in the media.
I just feel like it's, first of all, very oh my gosh, finally, this is another experience that I felt like I thought was only my experience that apparently is really relatable, at least for someone else who's queer. So I definitely usually feel seen for right off the bat. And sometimes it's a little different because it's this person's story and not mine, and everyone's different, so it doesn't have to be the same exact, upbringing or whatever story they're trying to convey. Heartstopper, I feel is relatable, as a queer person who's trying to date and whatever. It's just not exactly my story because I wasn't able to like, I guess, fully express myself in high school.
Rene said he feels that queer representation in shows such as Pose and Heartstopper stay true to the queer experience, but understands how some aspects are dramatized for television and effect.
Like they dramatize certain events to make it more interesting, to make it more relatable, I guess. But at the same time, I feel like Heartstopper, especially Pose, and especially with the intentions of what the show is trying to convey, stay true to like what the actual queer experience is. Like many trans people and queer people have been assaulted or abused, and Pose, I feel like, really does a good job at exemplifying that.
When it comes to what he hopes to see in the future in terms of queer representation, Rene said he wants to see more characters who look more like him physically.
I definitely haven't seen people who are like similar and physically. Like I'm not really skinny, but I'm also not like I don't know. Like I'm like I feel like in between, like stocky or whatever. And I feel like I genuinely don't see that. I know like entertainment, everyone has to be like hot and luscious, but like I don't know. I feel hot and luscious, and I feel like there should definitely be other people in media who look like me.
As we have explored in a previous episode, LGBTQ plus representation isn't just about seeing queer characters and stories on our screens, but making sure that the representation being presented is diverse and represents many individuals and groups that make up the queer community.
I think the more media that we have that is reflective of a large variety of people's voices, the more the media that does really miss, that ends up being more harmful, kind of doesn't matter. Those become outliers. But if we only have a few examples to point to, and one of those examples is harmful, then it makes it really tough.
Jones also said that she hopes to see less focus on the specifics of LGBTQ plus identities and more focus on LGBTQ plus people.
Some series and movies do that better than others, in terms of making the characters full people and not just, props for their identities.
As for Rene, he said he's happy to see more queer representation in the media, but that doesn't mean we should be stopping the fight for change and the fight for more progression.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many intertwining topics that I think need to be discussed in entertainment and portrayed on TV to make it more accessible and easy to understand for people who aren't in that, who don't relate with that identity of being queer or Black or etc.
Although representation has come so far, LGBTQ plus representation in the media is an ongoing battle that still has much work to be done. After speaking with Jones and Rene, we could further see how important and how much of an impact positive and diverse representation can have. Jones says she believes representation is important for her and important for a lot of other people as well because of the power and change it can make.
It can help drive other components of change in more material ways, because obviously media is a huge driver of the cultural conversation of what people are aware of. People get cues about what to think about other people, how to interact with people who are different from them, and media is a big component of that. So I think when it's done well and when it's done responsibly, it can have a positive impact in that way.